Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care.
The transport shuttle hummed softly as it approached Varelia Prime, the home planet of the Varelians. Ethan Carter leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the view through the shuttle's window, a vast, swirling expanse of violet and silver clouds blanketing the planet below. He couldn't help but feel a pang of anticipation as he neared the world that would soon test humanity's diplomatic ambitions and, perhaps, his own boundaries as a cultural exchange representative. Upon his arrival, Ethan was led to the city of Alenter, a dazzling, crystalline metropolis where the highborn Varelians resided. Towering spires of shimmering quartz rose into the sky, each one pulsing with an inner light that cast a soft glow across the entire city. Varelians moved gracefully around him, their long, willowy forms and violet-tinged skin reflecting their almost ethereal appearance. They carried themselves with a dignified reserve, occasionally casting curious glances in his direction, their eyes, a deep, vibrant shade of gold, sparkling with intelligence. Ethan's guide, a Varelian diplomat named Sevra, gestured for him to follow as she led him into the central hall of Empress Arena's palace, where an introductory ceremony was being held in his honor. The hall was expansive, its walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting scenes of ancient Varelian history, where legends of past wars and treaties mingled with depictions of peace and prosperity. The room pulsed with a quiet grandeur, designed to awe visitors while exuding an air of profound serenity. Amid the crowd of dignitaries, Ethan's attention was caught by a figure near the edge of the gathering. She stood apart from the others, her posture relaxed yet commanding, an aura of self-assurance that Ethan found immediately captivating. She had the same violet-tinted skin as the others, but her features were softer, more curious. Her dark hair, which flowed down her back in loose waves, framed a pair of piercing golden eyes that seemed to flicker with intrigue as they met his. As Sevra introduced him to the Empress, Ethan noticed the woman he'd spotted earlier approaching, her gaze fixed intently on him. Once the formalities concluded, she moved to his side and introduced herself in a voice that carried a lilt of curiosity and warmth. "I am Leora," she said, inclining her head in a polite yet unmistakably personal greeting. "You must be the human they've told us about. We were beginning to wonder if you'd ever make it." "Pleasure to meet you, Leora," Ethan replied, sensing a spark of genuine friendliness in her demeanor. "I'm glad I finally arrived. The journey was unique." He offered a light smile, noting her intense gaze that seemed to study him with both intrigue and caution. "Unique," she echoed, her lips curving into a slight smile. "I've heard humans describe many things as unique. You'll find we are a people of deep curiosity as well. And for us, human anatomy, customs, and behaviors are fascinating." She hesitated before adding, "You seem different from the others we've met." Ethan chuckled softly, slightly flustered by her candor. "I suppose I am, but I'd like to think we're all just as curious as you are." Their conversation continued as they strolled through the hall, and Leora's questions flowed naturally, each one more personal than the last. She wanted to know about Earth, the diversity of human cultures, and, with a quiet fascination, even about the physical differences between humans and Varelians. Ethan could see the respectful intensity of her interest, an earnestness that seemed to go beyond mere diplomacy. As the evening wore on, Leora's questions only deepened, and Ethan sensed a kind of openness he hadn't expected. Her initial formal tone softened, and he saw that, beneath her poised exterior, she harbored a genuine curiosity and, perhaps, rebellious streak that set her apart from her kin. Eventually, they made their way to a terrace overlooking the city, where the last light of Varelia's twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft, twilight glow. They stood in silence for a moment, letting the surreal beauty of the city wash over them. "It's beautiful here," Ethan murmured, feeling a quiet sense of awe. "Thank you. I've always thought so too," Leora replied, her voice tinged with something he couldn't quite place. "Ethan, you're here to foster understanding between our worlds, yes?" "Yes," he replied, sensing her intent gaze. "I believe we have much to learn from each other." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Then let's make sure that we do. I'd like to show you our world as it truly is, not just the facade we present to diplomats and ambassadors. Would you be interested?" Ethan felt a thrill of anticipation. "I'd be honored, Leora." With a smile that hinted at future secrets yet to be revealed, she extended her hand, an invitation he accepted without hesitation. As they walked back inside, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his journey had only just begun and that his guide would lead him far deeper into Varelia's mysteries than he had ever expected. The following day, Ethan found himself accompanying Leora through the heart of Valentir. The crystalline city pulsed with life around them, bustling with Varelians engaged in their daily routines. As they walked, Leora pointed out various structures, explaining their purpose and the values they represented: order, knowledge, unity. Each structure had its own story, and through her words, Ethan began to grasp the depth of Varelian history and the traditions that governed their lives. Yet, as the conversation turned back to Earth, Leora's reserved demeanor gave way to a curiosity that bordered on fascination. She wanted to know everything: the landscapes, the diversity of Earth's cultures, and, perhaps most intriguingly, human social norms. Her questions were detailed, almost scientific, and her expressions shifted between interest and amusement as he answered. As they approached a tranquil garden with shimmering pools and flowering vines that glowed faintly in the dim light, Leora took a seat on one of the benches, gesturing for Ethan to join her. The quiet surroundings seemed to deepen the intimacy of their conversation, and her questions became more personal. "Tell me, Ethan," she began, her golden eyes fixed intently on him, "in human culture, what is considered attractive?" Ethan was momentarily taken aback by the directness of her question. Though he'd come to expect it from her, he considered how to explain human attraction, knowing it could come off as complex or even trivial compared to Varelian norms. "It varies, actually," he replied, thinking carefully. "For some, it's about appearance, physical traits that stand out. For others, it's about the way someone makes them feel or how their personalities connect." Leora listened, clearly captivated. "And is it common for humans to openly show these attractions?" "Depends," he said with a chuckle. "In some cultures, people are very open about it. In others, it's kept private. I think most humans fall somewhere in between. We like to get to know each other first, build a connection." Her head tilted slightly as she processed his words, her lips curving into a thoughtful smile. "You know, in Varelian society, attraction is rarely discussed openly. We bond based on compatibility and shared purpose. There's beauty in that. But," she paused, searching for the right words, "sometimes I wonder what it would be like to feel that kind of immediate connection you describe." Ethan felt a gentle warmth in her tone that surprised him. "It sounds like Varelians have a sense of duty to each other. Maybe that's why our differences intrigue you." She nodded, an almost wistful look in her eyes. "It's true. There's a structure to everything here. Emotions, feelings. These things are managed, controlled. When I see how openly you express yourself, it's refreshing." She paused, a blush rising to her violet-tinged cheeks as she ventured. "Even your differences, physically, intrigue me. Varelian anatomy has evolved for efficiency, a single reproductive organ that serves our purposes. Yet, humans, you possess more." The boldness of her statement took Ethan by surprise. Though he sensed her curiosity was genuine, he could see the unguarded interest in her gaze, mixed with a hint of shyness that made her all the more endearing. "Yes, I suppose that's true," he said, clearing his throat. "Our biology is unique, even by Earth standards, but it seems there's a lot more to our differences than just the physical." Leora's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Indeed, and yet I find myself curious about those differences." She hesitated, then added, "I've never felt drawn to anyone like this before. Perhaps that's part of what makes you so intriguing." Ethan felt his own curiosity and attraction growing, but he reminded himself of his role as an ambassador. Yet Leora's earnestness, her willingness to delve into uncharted territories of emotion, captivated him. He sensed that for her, exploring these questions was more than mere intrigue. It was a step outside the rigid framework she had grown up with. Their conversation shifted, exploring topics ranging from their respective childhoods to the role of family and relationships in their cultures. Ethan explained the concept of romance, a foreign notion to Varelians who were more accustomed to partnerships based on purpose rather than personal connection. Leora listened closely, and as they spoke, her hand brushed against his, lingering just a moment too long. Her touch was light, deliberate, and Ethan felt a surge of emotion at the subtle contact. It was a small gesture, yet it felt deeply significant, as if she was allowing herself to be vulnerable with him, testing the boundaries between their worlds. In the quiet of the garden, the connection between them grew. Leora finally admitted in a soft voice that she had always longed to understand emotions that Varelian society often dismissed as unnecessary. Her openness moved him, and he responded by sharing stories of his own vulnerabilities, the times he'd taken risks or faced loss, and how these experiences had shaped his understanding of love and companionship. By the time they left the garden, Ethan felt that he and Leora had crossed an invisible threshold. There was an understanding between them now, a recognition of something deeper than simple curiosity. As they walked back to the palace, Leora's voice was quieter, more reflective. "Ethan, you've given me much to consider. I think, perhaps, our worlds have more in common than I once believed." He looked at her, sensing the sincerity in her words. Then maybe that's what this exchange is really about, finding what connects us, even if it's unexpected. Leora glanced at him, her expression unreadable but her eyes warm. "Yes, and perhaps seeing how far we're willing to go to explore it." The words lingered in the air as they returned to the grand halls of the palace. Ethan felt a thrill of anticipation, sensing that this journey was only beginning, and that Leora, with her courage and curiosity, would continue to challenge the boundaries between them. The next morning, Ethan found Leora waiting for him outside the palace, her expression as poised as ever, though her golden eyes held a quiet spark he was coming to recognize. "I thought today, if you're willing, I could show you more of our world," she said, a slight, almost mischievous smile curving her lips. "I want you to see Varelia beyond the palace walls." Ethan agreed readily, his curiosity piqued as they set out on foot through the city, moving away from the bustling crystalline center into quieter outskirts, where the buildings became sparse and the landscape more wild. Leora explained that Alentor's surroundings were a blend of preserved nature and carefully cultivated gardens, each designed to showcase the beauty of Varelian flora and fauna. Their path led them into a dense forest where the trees stretched high above, their trunks wrapped in vines that glowed softly in the dappled sunlight. The air was fragrant with the scent of alien blooms, strange flowers that opened as they passed, their petals glistening with dew that sparkled in every color of the spectrum. "This forest is called the Cellar Woodlands," Leora explained, her voice reverent as she touched a delicate blue petal with her fingers. "It's a sacred place for my people. Our ancestors believe that the energy here connects us to the very essence of Varelia. Every tree, every creature, is part of that bond." Ethan marveled at the serene beauty surrounding them, feeling the quiet power of the forest settle over him. He could sense Leora's deep connection to her world, a quiet reverence that made her steps deliberate, respectful. They walked for hours, speaking of the differences in their worlds. Ethan described Earth's sprawling oceans, deserts, and forests, each vibrant and distinct, while Leora listened intently, her gaze far away as she imagined the places he described. "It's strange," she murmured as they stopped by a crystal-clear stream, watching its waters shimmer with iridescent hues. "To think of a world where the environment is untamed, where nature is allowed to shape itself. Here, we've always believed in cultivation and balance." "Balance is good," Ethan replied, crouching to trail his fingers through the cool water. "But I think sometimes it's beautiful when things are wild, uncontained. There's a kind of freedom in letting life grow without boundaries." Leora seemed to consider this, a wistful look passing over her face. "Freedom, that's a concept not often discussed here. Our lives are structured, guided by purpose and tradition. We know our roles from the day we're born." She hesitated, glancing at him as though weighing whether to share more. "For many, It's fulfilling. But there are those of us who long for something else. Ethan could hear the unspoken words, the quiet yearning beneath her tone. He wanted to reach out, to reassure her that he understood, but he held back, sensing that she needed to reveal her feelings in her own time. They continued their walk, reaching a cliffside that overlooked the sprawling Lyrisand plains below. The sight was breathtaking, rolling fields of iridescent grass that rippled in the wind, their hues shifting from silver to deep blue as the twin suns cast their light. A distant herd of creatures grazed, their sleek bodies dotted with shimmering patterns that reflected the sunlight. Ethan and Leora sat on the edge of the cliff, the world spread out before them. A comfortable silence settled between them as they absorbed the view. "Do you ever wonder," Leora began, breaking the silence, "what it would be like to live without the weight of tradition, to be free to choose your own path?" Ethan nodded, sensing that this question was deeply personal for her. "I think everyone wonders that at some point, even in my world, where we have more freedom, people still feel bound by expectations, by the roles society assigns them. But we also have the chance to push back, to define ourselves." She turned to him, her gaze intense. "And that is what I find so intriguing about your kind. You embrace individuality, even when it goes against the grain. I've never had the courage to question my place until now." Ethan felt a surge of admiration for her honesty. He saw her as more than just a diplomat or a representative of her species. She was a person, complex and questioning, yearning for something beyond the life she had always known. "Leora," he said softly, "I think it's courageous to even ask those questions. It means you're open to change, to growth. That's something rare and powerful." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, she seemed to drop the formal reserve that had always cloaked her. "Thank you, Ethan. I haven't felt this free in a long time. I never imagined a human would be the one to show me a new way of seeing the world." She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his. The touch was warm, a gentle connection that seemed to anchor them both. Ethan felt his heart race, aware of the unspoken bond forming between them, a delicate thread of trust and attraction that neither dared to break. As they sat there, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, Leora took a deep breath. "There's something about you, Ethan. Something refreshing. You don't hide what you feel. You're open, honest, even when it's uncomfortable. I think I envy that." Ethan turned to her, his hand tightening slightly on hers. "Maybe that's why we're here, to learn from each other. And maybe to find something neither of us expected." Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment, the world around them faded. It was just them, two individuals from different worlds, connected by a shared sense of wonder and the quiet beginnings of something deeper. As the last rays of the twin suns vanished beyond the horizon, Leora sighed, a contented sound that seemed to echo Ethan's own emotions. "I think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that this is only the beginning of what we'll discover together." They rose, making their way back to the city in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. But as they walked, Ethan knew that their journey had shifted, taking on a meaning that went beyond diplomacy or duty. He could sense that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, guided by the fragile, growing bond between them. The following day, as Ethan arrived in the palace's main hall, he noticed a different energy in the air. The usual quiet decorum of Varelian life had been replaced by a sense of anticipation, the corridors bustling with people dressed in elaborate ceremonial attire. Leora stood near the entrance, her figure adorned in flowing robes of deep sapphire and silver. Her dark hair swept back to reveal delicate markings on her skin he hadn't noticed before, symbols etched lightly, almost glowing against her violet-tinged skin. When she caught sight of him, she smiled and approached, her steps purposeful yet graceful. "Ethan," she greeted warmly, "I have a special invitation for you. Today, we celebrate the Festival of Alheran, a day dedicated to honoring our ancestors and the achievements they left for us. I thought you might appreciate seeing this side of our culture." "I'd be honored," he replied, feeling the thrill of entering deeper into the world Leora had described. Her openness and willingness to share her culture left him feeling both privileged and intrigued. "Thank you, Leora." She guided him through the hall, explaining that the festival was a rare occasion when Varelians allowed their formal boundaries to soften, letting their personal achievements shine in various performances and displays of skill. Each participant chose how to honor their heritage. Some displayed physical prowess, while others showcased their intellectual or creative talents. They reached an open courtyard where a crowd had gathered, arranged in a circular formation around a central platform. Leora led Ethan to a raised balcony that offered a clear view, and he noticed that her demeanor had shifted slightly, her gaze sharpening as she surveyed the scene below. She seemed almost regal, embodying the pride and poise of her lineage. The ceremony began with a series of performances. Musicians played haunting melodies on instruments unfamiliar to Ethan, their sound resonating through the courtyard with an almost hypnotic quality. Dancers moved with precise, elegant gestures, their forms weaving stories of battles won and treaties formed, symbolizing both the resilience and diplomacy that had shaped Varelian history. When the first round of performances ended, Leora turned to him, her expression softer now, though a glimmer of pride remained. "This festival is not just about the past," she explained, "but about each individual's place within it. We are expected to contribute something of ourselves, a demonstration of what we bring to our people." "Does that mean you'll be participating?" Ethan asked, curious to see what role Leora would play in the event. A faint blush crept onto her cheeks. "Yes," she admitted, glancing away briefly before meeting his gaze again. "I usually present a recitation poetry, or an old story that reflects something personal. It's intimate in a way. I never imagined I'd share it with someone from another world." Ethan felt a swell of appreciation for the vulnerability she was willing to show. "I'd be honored to witness it. Thank you for including me in something so personal." Leora inclined her head, a grateful smile on her lips. "Then I'll do my best." Soon, it was her turn. Leora stepped gracefully onto the central platform, standing tall and proud before the gathered crowd. A hush fell over the courtyard as she began to recite an ancient tale of a Varelian warrior who defied tradition to save her people, abandoning the safety of her title and position to confront a threat alone. As she spoke, her voice filled with emotion and conviction, her words painting vivid images of courage and sacrifice. Ethan watched, mesmerized. He could see how deeply the story resonated with her, each word carrying layers of meaning. Her voice held a vulnerability that struck him, as if the story mirrored something within her, a longing for freedom, perhaps, or a hidden strength he had only begun to glimpse. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause, their admiration clear. She returned to his side, her gaze lowered, clearly moved by the intensity of the moment. Ethan felt the urge to reach out, to reassure her, but he held back, sensing the personal significance of the ritual. "That was beautiful, Leora," he said softly. "The story, your voice, it's clear how much it means to you." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Ethan. It's a tale I hold close. It reminds me that even within our traditions, there is room for courage, for those who seek something more." Before he could respond, a voice called her name from across the courtyard, drawing their attention. An elder Varelian approached, dressed in richly embroidered robes, his face stern but his eyes thoughtful as they flicked between Leora and Ethan. Ethan recognized him as Elder Varian, a respected figure and one of the Empress's chief advisors. "Leora," Varian began, his tone respectful but firm, "it is commendable that you honor our traditions. However," his gaze shifted briefly to Ethan, "I hope you remember the importance of our customs when engaging with guests from other worlds." The subtle reprimand was clear, and Ethan sensed the tension in Leora's posture as she nodded. "Of course, Elder Varian, I am aware of our responsibilities and the significance of our bonds." Varian inclined his head, a small but significant gesture of approval, before retreating into the crowd. As he disappeared, Leora sighed, a barely perceptible look of frustration crossing her face. "Apologies, Ethan," she said quietly. "Our society is careful when it comes to outsiders. The expectations placed on those of my standing are rigid. Elder Varian means well, but sometimes... She trailed off, searching for the right words. Sometimes it feels like a cage. Ethan felt a surge of empathy, realizing the depth of the constraints she faced. I understand, Leora. It's clear you care about your people and your role, but it sounds like you also want the freedom to be yourself. She looked at him, something raw in her expression. Yes, and meeting you has only intensified that desire. You've shown me a world where people choose their paths, where bonds are formed not out of duty, but out of connection. I envy that. Her words stirred something deep within him, a quiet admiration mixed with a growing sense of responsibility. He wanted to support her, to encourage the courage she'd shown in questioning her place. Before he could respond, the crowd around them began dispersing, the festival transitioning into a more informal gathering. Leora took a deep breath, her composure returning as she turned back to him. Come, she said, offering a small smile. There's a quiet spot just beyond the courtyard. I'd like to share something with you. Curious, Ethan followed her through a hidden archway, into a secluded garden filled with delicate, luminescent flowers. The air was fragrant, thick with the scent of night-blooming petals, and the world felt hushed, as though holding its breath. Leora turned to face him, her expression serious, yet softened by something he hadn't seen before. Hope, perhaps, or a glimmer of something deeper. Ethan, I want to thank you for listening, for showing me that there is a path beyond what I have always known. Her words were quiet, but they held a power that echoed in the silence around them. Ethan took a step closer, feeling the warmth of her presence, the connection that had grown between them over these past days. It was more than diplomacy, more than friendship. It was something rare and fragile, a bond that bridged worlds. Leora, he murmured, his voice filled with the emotions he could no longer contain. You don't have to be alone in this. I'll be here, no matter what path you choose. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the flowers, and in that moment, he felt the weight of everything unspoken between them. Then let us walk this path together, she whispered, her hand reaching for his, their fingers entwining in a silent promise beneath the alien stars. The quiet of the hidden garden wrapped around them, filled with the soft glow of Varelian flora, which illuminated their expressions in shades of violet and silver. Leora's hand remained in Ethan's, her touch steady, yet charged with a tension neither could ignore. The closeness of her presence, the warmth radiating from her skin, stirred something in Ethan he'd been trying to suppress, a yearning that went beyond mere curiosity. Ethan, Leora whispered, her golden eyes searching his face. I've never known anyone like you before. I'm supposed to embody the expectations of my people. But with you, I feel free to be myself. He felt his own restraint falter as he replied, his voice equally soft. And I've never met anyone like you, Leora. You've shown me so much of your world, your culture. But it's who you are beneath it all that draws me in. Her expression softened, and Ethan could see vulnerability flicker across her face, a hint of uncertainty and anticipation. In that moment, she wasn't just a representative of her people or a figure bound by tradition. She was simply Leora, a woman reaching out to someone who made her feel seen. Their hands entwined, and Ethan's thumb brushed lightly against her skin, exploring the faint markings that traced her fingers. Her breath hitched slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her gaze shifted to his hand, her fingers tracing his, marveling at the contrast of their skin tones and the warmth between them. You're different from anyone I've known, she murmured, a shy smile playing at her lips. Even in your appearance, your body, your skin, everything about you is intriguing. Ethan couldn't help but chuckle softly, feeling both flattered and somewhat self-conscious under her curious gaze. I guess humans are full of surprises, but you know, I could say the same about you. Her gaze became contemplative, as if debating something, and then, with a quiet determination, she took a step closer, her curiosity finally overtaking her reserve. Could I ask you something? Something personal? She ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his heart racing at the intimacy of the moment. Of course. Leora took a deep breath, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush as she spoke. "It's just, I've heard that humans have certain physical traits that are, well, unique." She hesitated, her words faltering as she searched his face for reassurance. Realizing her meaning, Ethan felt a rush of warmth at her bold question. Though he could see her inquiry was made with genuine curiosity, he smiled, nodding to reassure her. "Yes, I suppose we do. I imagine Varelian anatomy is different." She nodded, her own expression softening with a shy but earnest openness. "It is. We evolved to have, well, fewer reproductive features. So, when I heard that humans have two, it sounded unusual." Ethan chuckled, appreciating her willingness to approach such a personal topic with sincerity. "It's a little different, yes. I suppose each of our species evolved in ways that suit our environments, but it's nothing unusual for us." Leora's hand rested gently on his arm, her touch warm through the thin fabric of his shirt. "To me, it's not just curiosity," she admitted, her gaze dropping for a moment before meeting his again, filled with a quiet but intense vulnerability. "I find myself drawn to you, Ethan, in a way that I can't explain. This connection, whatever it is, feels rare, and I don't want to ignore it." Her words resonated deeply with him, echoing his own feelings. Their differences, which had initially been a source of intrigue, now seemed like small bridges between them, easily crossed. "Neither do I, Leora," he replied softly, stepping closer, feeling her warmth radiate between them. "I didn't come here expecting this, but I'm grateful for it. For you." Their gazes met, and for a heartbeat, the world around them vanished, leaving only the unspoken bond that had grown between them. Ethan leaned in, his movement slow, as though giving her a chance to pull back, but Leora remained still, her eyes closing as their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a gentle meeting, filled with wonder and the reverence of crossing a line that had seemed impossible only days before. Her hand found its way to his shoulder, and his fingers brushed her cheek, the warmth of her skin grounding him in the moment, making it feel both surreal and profoundly real. When they parted, her eyes lingered on his, her expression softened by a quiet joy that left him breathless. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion, "I never thought this would be possible, that I could feel this way for someone so different, yet so familiar." He smiled, his thumb brushing her cheek, feeling a surge of affection for the woman who had trusted him with her heart. "Neither did I, Leora, but I think sometimes the best connections are the ones that surprise us." They stood there, wrapped in the silence of the secluded garden, each savoring the shared warmth of the moment. Ethan knew the challenges they'd face, her position, the expectations of her people, the barriers between their worlds, but he also knew that what they had was worth fighting for. Just then, a faint rustle sounded from beyond the garden wall. Both of them turned, instincts sharpened by the vulnerability of the moment. From the shadows emerged a figure, one of the palace guards, his expression startled as he caught sight of them. "Apologies, my lady," the guard stammered, bowing low. "I was sent to inform you that Elder Varian requests your presence immediately. There is an urgent matter." Leora's face hardened slightly, a hint of disappointment mingling with her composure. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "I'll be there shortly." As the guard disappeared back into the palace corridors, she turned back to Ethan, her expression filled with a bittersweet mix of resolve and regret. "It seems our time is always borrowed," she murmured, her hand lingering on his arm. Ethan reached up, covering her hand with his own. "Maybe, but I'm willing to wait. Whatever challenges come, Leora, I'll be here. Whatever it is between us, it's worth it." Her eyes softened, and she nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Then I'll hold you to that, Ethan." They shared one last look before she turned to leave, her footsteps fading as she disappeared down the garden path. Ethan watched her go, a sense of quiet determination settling over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them for her, for this bond they had begun to forge against all odds. As he left the garden, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the journey they'd embarked on together would change them both in ways they had yet to understand. And though the path was uncertain, he knew he would follow it, wherever it led. That evening, Ethan found himself pacing the quiet hall outside his quarters. The events of the day lingered in his mind. The festival, Leora's vulnerability, their kiss in the secluded garden. The memory was fresh, his emotions a mixture of exhilaration and a hint of uncertainty. He knew the risks they were taking. For her, and perhaps even for him, there were potential consequences. Yet, with each thought of her, the resolve in his heart grew stronger. A soft chime sounded at his door. When he opened it, he found Leora standing there, her expression hesitant, yet filled with a quiet determination. She wore a simpler robe tonight, free of the ceremonial markings, and her gaze held an openness he hadn't seen before. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," he replied, stepping aside to let her enter. The soft lighting of his quarters cast a warm glow around her, making her features appear almost ethereal. For a moment, they stood in silence, each studying the other, the air between them charged with an unspoken understanding. Ethan could see the courage it had taken for her to come here, and he knew she was trusting him in a way that went beyond words. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability, "I've spent my whole life doing what was expected of me. I know my role, my duties, but tonight, I want to be here for myself." Her admission hung in the air, and Ethan felt the weight of her words. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently brush her cheek. "Then be here as yourself, Leora. No expectations, just us." A small, grateful smile softened her features, and she closed the distance between them, resting her hand against his chest. His heart raced under her touch, a feeling he'd been suppressing now blooming into something undeniable. She looked up at him, her golden eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and their lips met once more. This time, the kiss was deeper, a blend of wonder and passion that left no room for hesitation. Leora's fingers explored his shoulders, tracing the shape of his form with a delicate reverence. Her touch was light, almost as if she was savoring every sensation, every moment, and Ethan responded in kind, his hands finding her waist, holding her with a tenderness he hadn't realized he possessed. Their kiss deepened, and Ethan felt the barriers between them, cultural, physical, emotional, begin to dissolve. They were simply two souls, connected in a way that went beyond words or traditions. As they broke apart, she looked at him, her cheeks flushed, her breathing slightly quickened. "There's so much I don't know," she admitted, a hint of laughter in her voice, soft yet tinged with awe. "About humans, about you. I want to learn, Ethan." He smiled, his own breath coming in shallow bursts as he held her close. "Then we'll take it one step at a time. I'll show you everything you want to know." A blush crept across her cheeks as she nodded, and slowly, they began to explore each other in a way that was both tender and filled with quiet awe. Their differences, once a barrier, became a source of fascination and connection, each touch an unspoken promise of acceptance and understanding. Leora traced the contours of his hands, marveling at the way his fingers moved, the warmth of his skin against hers. Her own hands, more slender and elongated, intertwined with his as if testing the fit of their bond. She studied him with the same quiet intensity he'd grown to cherish, her gaze filled with admiration as she took in the details of his features, his humanity. "Your hands," she murmured, her fingers brushing over his knuckles. "They're so different, strong, yet gentle." Ethan chuckled softly, feeling her words deepen the connection between them. "Yours too, beautiful, delicate, yet powerful. You have a strength I admire, Leora." Their exploration continued, each touch and whispered word weaving a tapestry of trust and vulnerability. Ethan found himself sharing stories of his past, moments of triumph, loss, and hope. Leora listened intently, her eyes never leaving his, absorbing each word as though it were precious. In turn, she shared pieces of her life, Her upbringing as a figure of prominence in Varelian society, the weight of her duties, the quiet yearning for freedom she'd never before expressed. Each revelation brought them closer, the boundaries between them dissolving until they felt like kindred spirits in the truest sense. The night deepened, and they lay together, wrapped in the warmth of their newfound closeness. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I never imagined," he began, his voice soft, "that I'd find something like this here with you." Leora's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. "Nor did I," she whispered, her gaze filled with sincerity. "But meeting you has shown me there is more to life than the paths chosen for us. I want this, Ethan. I want us." Her words left him breathless, and he realized in that moment just how deeply he cared for her. It was more than attraction, more than curiosity. It was a bond that had taken root in his heart, one that he knew would endure. They drifted into a comfortable silence, their breaths synchronized as they lay together. But even as sleep began to claim them, Ethan couldn't shake the thought of what lay ahead. The road would not be easy. He knew that their bond would face challenges, societal, cultural, perhaps even political. But in this quiet moment, with Leora in his arms, he felt a strength he hadn't known before. For her, for this connection they had found, he would face whatever came their way. As dawn's first light touched the sky, Leora stirred, her eyes meeting his in the soft glow of morning. There was a hint of sadness there, but also a quiet determination. "We'll need to be cautious, Ethan," she murmured, her voice laced with both affection and resolve. "My people, they won't understand, but I don't regret this." He nodded, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "Then we'll face it together, one step at a time." With a final, lingering kiss, they parted, each carrying the memory of the night as a promise of the bond they had forged. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, but they were ready to face it together. The following morning, word of Leora's late-night visit to Ethan's quarters had begun to circulate through the palace. It started as whispers among the staff, a soft murmur of intrigue that grew louder as the day progressed. By the time Ethan and Leora crossed paths in one of the palace corridors, he could sense the wary gazes of onlookers, their stares charged with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Leora's expression remained composed, her posture as dignified as ever, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze flickered briefly to the floor before meeting his eyes. She had prepared for this moment, but he knew the reality of it weighed heavily on her. As they walked together, their conversation quiet and guarded, they made their way to a grand hall where the Varelian Council gathered, summoned by the news of Leora's indiscretion. Leora had called it an unavoidable confrontation, though Ethan could see the unease in her expression, the hint of vulnerability she tried to hide. The hall was vast and imposing, its walls adorned with intricate murals depicting Varelian history. Members of the council, adorned in ceremonial robes, were seated in a semicircle, their expressions varying from solemn to outright hostile as Ethan and Leora entered. At the center sat Elder Varian, his gaze fixed intently on Leora as he addressed her in a voice filled with restrained authority. "Leora," he began, his tone even but carrying an undercurrent of disappointment, "your actions have brought concern among the council. It is rare for one of your standing to associate so intimately with an outsider, especially one who does not share our ways." Leora lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with quiet defiance. "Elder Varian, with all due respect, my actions are my own. I understand the responsibilities of my role, but I also understand that true alliances are forged through understanding, not merely through duty." Varian's gaze shifted briefly to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "And yet there are boundaries, Leora. Boundaries meant to preserve our traditions, our unity. To disregard these is to risk alienating our people, weakening the values we have upheld for centuries." Ethan felt the weight of Varian's words, the warning veiled within them, and he glanced at Leora, silently offering his support. Her resolve seemed to strengthen under his gaze, and she turned back to the council, her voice steady. "Perhaps it is time for us to expand those boundaries," she replied, her tone respectful but unwavering. We have entered an era where interplanetary alliances are essential to our survival. By understanding others, truly understanding them, we strengthen ourselves. Ethan has shown me that there's more to humanity than we first assumed. Murmurs rippled through the council at her words, a mixture of shock and dissent. But Leora remained composed, her gaze steady as she continued. Ethan is not just an outsider, she said softly. He has proven himself to be loyal, honorable, and open-minded. Through him, I have come to understand that we can learn from one another, that we need not fear what is different. This connection, our bond, is not a threat. It is an opportunity. Varian's expression tightened, and his gaze shifted to Ethan, who sensed the scrutiny, the weight of expectation. He knew this was his moment to speak, to stand by Leora and validate her words. Elder Varian, Ethan began, his voice firm but respectful. I came here to foster understanding between our worlds. I understand your concerns, but I also believe that true alliances are built on trust and respect. Leora and we share a connection that goes beyond our differences. I stand here not just as a human representative, but as someone who respects your culture and wishes to honor it. Varian's eyes narrowed, his expression thoughtful as he regarded them both in silence. Finally, he leaned back, his voice colder now as he addressed Leora. Perhaps you are right, Leora. Perhaps there is value in alliances forged from understanding. But we must also consider the implications of your actions. To allow this connection to continue without constraint would be to send a message that our traditions are flexible. A younger council member, Elder Tyros, cleared his throat, drawing attention as he spoke up. Perhaps it is not tradition we need to worry about, but the perception of weakness. The people of Valenter look to us for guidance. How will they react to the sight of one of our own forming such detachments with an outsider? Leora's composure wavered slightly, and Ethan could see the strain in her expression as she held her ground. She was facing not only the disapproval of her elders, but the judgment of an entire society shaped by generations of conformity. But she refused to back down. I understand the weight of my actions, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with determination. And I am willing to bear it. I believe in this bond, and I believe it is worth the risk. The hall fell silent, the council members exchanging glances, their expressions varying from resigned to contemplative. Finally, Varian inclined his head, a subtle but clear gesture. Very well, Leora, he said, his tone carefully neutral. If you are willing to bear the consequences, then we will respect your choice for now. But know this, the path you have chosen will not be easy. The people may not understand, and there will be those who view your actions as a betrayal of our customs. Leora nodded, her gaze steady. I accept that, and I stand by my decision. With a nod, Varian dismissed them, the council members beginning to disperse. Leora and Ethan exchanged a look, relief and determination mingling in their expressions as they left the hall, stepping back into the quiet of the palace corridors. As they walked, Leora's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that spoke of both defiance and unity. The weight of the council's judgment hung over them, but in that moment, they knew they had each other's support. They paused near a window overlooking the city, the light of Varelia's twin suns casting a warm glow over their faces. Leora turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude and resolve. Thank you, Ethan, she murmured, her voice filled with emotion. I couldn't have done this without you. He squeezed her hand, his own heart swelling with pride and admiration. You were the one who stood up to them, Leora. I'm just here to support you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. She smiled, her gaze softened by a mixture of affection and determination. Yes, together. Their hands clasped, they stood side by side, ready to face the uncertain road that lay ahead, knowing that their bond, tested and strengthened by the challenges they had faced, was something neither of them would ever let go. The news of Ethan and Leora's relationship spread quickly, permeating the palace walls and rippling outward to the city of Valenter and beyond. Their bond had become a topic of both fascination and scandal, sparking debates and mixed opinions among Varelians. Some whispered of betrayal, Others were curious, but all were watching. Ethan and Leora met every day, despite the unspoken tension in the air, finding solace in each other's company amid the scrutiny. But they both felt the pressure, an invisible weight pressing down on them, testing the foundation of what they had built together. One morning, as they shared breakfast in a secluded terrace within the palace gardens, Leora seemed distracted, her gaze distant as she traced a finger around the rim of her glass. Ethan reached out, his hand covering hers gently. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice soft, aware of the unspoken worries that had been building over the days. Leora looked up, her golden eyes clouded with concern. "The people. I've heard their whispers, the judgment. I knew there would be resistance, but I didn't realize how deeply ingrained these sentiments are." Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Change isn't easy. It challenges people's comfort, their beliefs. But I think what we're doing is worth it. Sometimes, to create something meaningful, you have to push against the boundaries." She nodded, her gaze warming slightly. "You always seem to know the right thing to say, Ethan. It's one of the things I admire about you." They shared a quiet smile, but the moment was interrupted by a faint commotion from within the palace. A servant hurried toward them, bowing low as he approached. "Lady Leora, Representative Ethan," the servant began, his voice tight with urgency. "The council has called an emergency gathering. They request your presence immediately." Exchanging a glance, they both rose, following the servant through the winding corridors until they reached the grand hall, where the Varelian council waited. As they entered, the tension in the room was palpable, the council members' faces set in expressions of quiet disapproval. Elder Varian was the first to speak, his voice heavy with reproach. "Leora, Ethan, your union has stirred discord among our people. We have received numerous complaints, concerns from those who view this alliance as a threat to our traditions, our very identity." Leora's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone measured. "And what of it, Elder Varian? Have we not always prided ourselves on strength, resilience, and open-mindedness? Must we be bound by fear?" Varian's gaze hardened. "Strength, yes, but there is a difference between strength and recklessness. By forming this union, you have disrupted the balance we have worked to maintain for generations. Our people are uncomfortable. Some fear that this relationship with a human could compromise the purity of our culture." Ethan felt a pang of anger at Varian's words, but he held his composure, choosing to address the council with respect. "With all due respect, Elder Varian, I came here to build understanding, to foster connection. This bond between Leora and me isn't a threat, it's a bridge. It's an example of what can be achieved when we set aside our differences and learn from each other." A few council members murmured among themselves, their expressions uncertain, but Varian's gaze remained steady, unyielding. Be that as it may, there are those who are unwilling to accept such change. Leora's role is significant, and her influence is vast. To see her with a human has shaken the confidence of our people, and many believe it undermines the stability of our society. Another council member, Elder Narration, spoke up, her tone more sympathetic but no less firm. "Leora, we acknowledge the depth of your connection, but perhaps it would be wise to consider the implications. If you value this union, you must also be prepared for the sacrifices it will require." Ethan glanced at Leora, noting the flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. He could see the internal struggle, the weight of the decision before her. She had fought for their bond, but now, faced with the reality of potential isolation from her people, he sensed her hesitation. But before he could speak, Leora's voice rang out, steady and clear. "I understand the stakes, elders, and I am prepared to face whatever consequences may come. My loyalty to Varelia remains unshaken, but I believe that this connection is a path forward, one that honors the spirit of unity our ancestors championed." Her words echoed through the hall, and for a brief moment, a tense silence fell over the council. Then Varian sighed, his gaze softening slightly, though his disapproval lingered. "Very well, Leora," he said slowly, his tone laden with resignation. "If this is truly your choice, we will respect it, but the road you have chosen will be fraught with challenges. You may find that the cost is higher than you anticipated." Leora nodded, her gaze steady. I am aware, and I accept the responsibility. With that, the council session came to an end. Leora and Ethan left the hall together, the weight of their decisions settling heavily on them as they walked through the palace corridors. Once they reached the quiet of her chambers, Leora turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and sadness. I knew this path would be difficult, but hearing the council's words, it feels as though I am being torn between two worlds. Ethan reached out, pulling her into his arms. Then let's build a world that's ours, one that honors both Varelia and Earth. We don't have to be defined by their boundaries, Leora. She rested her head against his chest, her voice barely a whisper. I want that, Ethan. I want a future with you. But I fear the price we'll have to pay. He held her tighter, his voice filled with quiet determination. Whatever the cost, Leora, we'll face it together. You don't have to carry this alone. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, finding solace in their shared strength. The challenges they faced were daunting, the path uncertain, but they knew that as long as they had each other, they could withstand whatever trials lay ahead. As the suns began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, they looked out over the landscape of Varelia, feeling the weight of the future pressing upon them. It would be a future filled with struggle and sacrifice, but also with the hope of a bond strong enough to overcome the boundaries of worlds. Together, they would walk this path, each step a testament to the love they had chosen above all else. Days passed, and the tension in the palace only grew. The servants were polite but distant, their once curious glances turning colder. Outside the palace, in the city of Alenter, murmurs and whispers about Leora's bond with the humans swelled into louder discontent. People saw it as a challenge to the fabric of their culture, something foreign and uncomfortable. One morning, as they walked through the palace gardens, a group of palace guards and advisors approached. Leora recognized one of the guards as Captain Iskry, a stoic and respected officer, who now stood with a firm expression and hands clasped tightly at his sides. Lady Leora, Iskry began, his tone respectful yet unyielding. The people are troubled. Your bond with Representative Ethan, it has caused a great disturbance. Many believe it undermines your role as a leader, that it goes against the values we have long held. Leora met his gaze, her expression unwavering. And what would you have me do, Captain Iskry? End a bond that I believe strengthens us all simply to appease those who are afraid of change? The captain hesitated, his face conflicted. We respect you deeply, my lady, but there are those in the city, those who feel that this bond weakens the purity of our lineage, that it challenges what it means to be Varelian. There are even rumors of protests. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. He knew that standing by Leora would make him a target for anger and prejudice, but he also knew he would endure anything if it meant supporting her. Stepping forward, he spoke, his voice steady and resolute. Captain Iskry, I understand the people's concerns, but I am here to build trust and understanding between our worlds. What Leora and I share is not a threat. It's an alliance that goes beyond politics and tradition. I respect your culture, but I also believe that the greatest strength lies in unity, even when that unity is unconventional. Iskry's gaze shifted, and for a moment, he seemed to consider Ethan's words, but the weight of tradition was heavy, and he shook his head, his expression resigned. Perhaps, Representative Ethan, but it is not my place to change the minds of our people. I am here to serve, to protect, and to uphold our customs. He turned to Leora, his voice softening slightly. Please, my lady, consider the impact of this decision. If you choose to stand by this bond, it may cost you the support of many who look to you as a leader. Leora's jaw tightened, but her eyes remained steady. I understand, Captain, but I cannot, in good conscience, abandon something that feels true, that has shown me a new way to understand myself and my place in this world. With a final, respectful nod, Captain Iskry and his advisors retreated, leaving Leora and Ethan alone in the garden. She turned to him, a faint sadness in her gaze, but also a resolve that left no room for doubt. They want me to choose, she murmured, her voice filled with quiet determination. To choose between my people and us. Ethan took her hands in his heart aching at the weight of the decision she faced. Then let's make our case to the council and to the people. Let them see that what we have is not a threat, but something that can bring our worlds closer. She nodded, a glimmer of hope lighting her expression. Then let's do it, together. Later that day, the council summoned Leora and Ethan, responding to the growing unrest in the city. They gathered in the central courtyard of Alenter, surrounded by Varelian citizens who had come to see their leader and the human by her side. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of curiosity, disapproval, and silent judgment that weighed heavily on them. Elder Varian stood at the center, his expression solemn as he addressed the crowd. People of Alenter, we have gathered today to address a matter of deep importance, a matter that challenges our very identity. Lady Leora has chosen a path that has stirred great concern among you all, a path that connects her with one who is not of our world. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, but Leora stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute as she addressed her people. My people, she began, her tone steady but filled with emotion. I know many of you are confused, perhaps even frightened by my choice. But I am here to tell you that this bond one share with Ethan is not something to fear. It is something I believe in, something that has shown me a new path forward. She gestured to Ethan, her gaze filled with sincerity. Ethan is a man of honor, someone who has come here to bridge the divide between our worlds. Through him, I have learned to see beyond the limits of tradition, to imagine a future where we can learn from one another, where we are stronger because of our differences. Varian's voice interrupted, a note of warning in his tone. And what of our traditions, Leora? Are we to cast them aside so easily? Leora met his gaze, her own steady. Tradition is important, yes, but tradition should serve the people, not imprison them. If our customs prevent us from embracing new possibilities, from reaching out to others, then perhaps it is time to reconsider what we hold dear. The crowd stirred, and Ethan could feel the shift in the air, a mixture of resistance and curiosity. He stepped forward, addressing the people with respect. I know I am an outsider, he began, his voice steady, and I understand that what I share with Leora may seem unusual, but I am here to honor her, to honor your culture, and to create a connection that strengthens us all. I did not come here to disrupt or challenge your way of life. I came to build a bridge, to show that humanity and Varelia can stand together as equals. Elder Varian's gaze hardened, and he gestured to the crowd. And yet the people must decide for themselves. If this bond is truly what you wish, then let them see it for what it is and judge accordingly. Ethan felt a pang of anxiety at Varian's words, but he stood tall, meeting the gazes of those around him. He knew that this was a test, a challenge to prove the depth of his and Leora's bond, and he was ready to face it. Leora reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a show of unity. Together, they turned to face the crowd, their resolve unshaken. Slowly, a murmur began to spread through the crowd. Some expressions softened, while others remained wary. But as they stood side by side, a few voices rose in hesitant approval, a small but significant sign that their words had reached some hearts. Elder Varian's expression was unreadable as he addressed them. If you are truly prepared to face the consequences, then so be it. But know this, your path will be fraught with trials. Not all will accept your bond, and there will be those who seek to challenge it. Leora nodded, her voice unwavering. I understand, Elder Varian, and I accept the responsibility. With that, the gathering dispersed, the crowd filtering out with mixed emotions. But Ethan and Leora remained in the courtyard, a sense of quiet triumph between them. As they walked through the palace corridors that evening, their hands still joined, Leora spoke softly, her voice filled with determination. Today was only the beginning. We've made our case, but I know there will be more challenges ahead. Ethan nodded, his heart filled with pride and admiration for the woman beside him. Then we'll face them together no matter what. You're not alone, Leora. I'm here, and I'll stand by you through everything. She looked at him, her eyes softened by affection. And I'll stand by you, Ethan. Whatever comes, I know that our bond is strong enough to endure it." They paused at the entrance to her chambers, sharing a lingering look that spoke of both the trials they had faced and the hope that lay ahead. With a quiet promise exchanged between them, they parted for the night, each strengthened by the other's resolve. The journey was far from over, but they knew that as long as they faced it together,